Where are my Democratic senators? Good morning.
Thank you. Now that we have a quorum, we'll call the meeting to order. And the first item of business is approval of the minutes of our meeting from March 23rd, which should be circulated around. Is there a motion to? Okay. There's been a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved. The next thing we have is a report exploring the state house building options with retirement systems. So turn that over to our secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the council will remember, or at least the ones who have been here for 2 terms, on September 22nd, the council adopted a resolution directing myself, the Secretary of the Senate, and the Clerk of the House to begin discussions with RSA regarding potential costs and options for a new or relocated legislative facility. Those conversations started pretty quickly. On April 25th, we executed an interagency agreement to conduct a RFP process to solicit proposals from architectural and engineering firms for the development, design, consulting, and testing of various locations. The location that's, we've already done an environmental one on the back parking lot. There's a current overview map aerial behind us. And then this other one, I want to be clear, that's not the building. The building has not been designed, but that's kind of a class and scope of building so that you can get a visualization of where it would go and how it would fit in, with the current State House kind of grayed out, with the expectation that this building would be demolished and park or green space would be put in to connect the new building to the Capitol complex in a way that seems fairly seamless. So that process has been undergoing. We've had a series of very productive conversations with RSA, as well as the architect and design folks who are currently doing a space study to determine how much square footage we would need. The current building's 318,000 square feet. It would be our expectation that we ought to be able to achieve a new building that is in that same vicinity, maybe slightly smaller, because a lot of the non-functional and wasted space in this building. RSA has proposed, and what we're putting on the table would be what they're calling a lease option. It's really a purchase option over time. RSA would do all the design, they'd build the building, they'd finance the cost, amortize it over a 25-year period. At any point pre-finishing construction or post-finishing construction, we'd have the option to buy it out for whatever the outstanding capital was and 8%. As a reminder, that 8% doesn't cover it covers financing. RSA also serves as the general contractor, a number of roles that are typically outside roles, all wrapped up into that 8% fee. And so that's kind of where we're at. They've exchanged a first draft of a lease agreement with us that's very similar You might have seen there's a new building going up on the back of the newest RSA headquarters. That building has been leased in its entirety for a 25-year period by the governor for the use of the Department of Revenue. We have that lease agreement with the additional option of the purchase that I just described. And I think where we're at, the recommendation of the Secretary of the Senate, the Clerk of the House, and myself, is that it's impossible to negotiate using 25 people. And so the proposal would be that y'all vote today to authorize the chair, the vice chair, and myself to continue those negotiations. And in the event that we reach terms that we find agreeable, be able to execute that and move forward.
Yes, ma'am.
Can we include one other person than the officers?
Well, it's up to the body to do that, certainly. Will of the body.
I think at least somebody from the group, other than the leaders all the time.
I think it should be a woman included.
Yeah. That might be the
It
answer.
have to be me, but I'm just saying, you know, I
might
have
be the
about
answer.
diversity, so. Nor is there an African American on that group, so.
Oh, I don't have a smell to nothing in here.
So is there a motion to be made about how to proceed on the potential state house?
I move it, Mr. Chairman. Put it in play.
Well, what specifically, what are you moving?
Yeah.
I thought you were asking for a motion. Moving to adopt the recommendations of Mr. Lang.
Okay, there's been a motion
I
to,
have a substitute motion.
but we need a second on this. Is there a second on the?
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. All right, Senator Figures?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee add one other person, and yes, it is leadership, but at least Senator Singleton or Representative Daniels should be added to that.
I second.
Or both, because you have a senator, you have you and Representative Pringle as the senator and the House member.
Mr. Chairman,
Not sure if they're,
may I be recognized? I agree in part with Senator Figures, but I don't agree that any of us should be excluded on the minority side, her, me, or anybody else otherwise. That's my comment to that motion. And with that, I'll yield back to the chairman.
Mr. Chair, may I?
At the appropriate time, I'd like to second the motion.
I just wanted to say, I think the bigger a negotiation committee gets, the more confusing it can become. So I would leave it with one senator and one representative added to the one senator and one representative that we have already on the committee. And that would be Senator Singleton and Representative Daniels, unless they want to designate somebody else.
Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized?
Yes, sir.
I think we have 3 senators on the committee, and if it's necessary, I'd make a substitute motion that any senator or House member can be considered if we're going to add additional people on the committee.
Well, look, it's up to the will of the body as to how we proceed on this, but I do think, as our secretary stated earlier, it gets a little cumbersome the larger the committee gets, and I think of course it is a pretty heavy mantle, I think, to carry, and I know I prefer not to have it as necessarily as small as it is. As I take it, your motion, Senator Figures, is to add the minority leader in the House and the Senate or their designees.
Yes.
And that's the.
But it would have to be a designee from the Legislative Council, is what I'm saying.
Okay, correct. And so with that being the motion for a, I guess a
Chair?
substitute. Yes, Senator.
Just for clarification, are we adding one, is the motion to include one senator and one House member additional? Is this a motion for diversity?
Yes.
On the, or is it a combination of both? I'd just like some
I
clarification.
take it a combination of both.
It's the addition to include, to have inclusivity with diversity.
But would both be minority members, or?
Well, I nominated, or I made the motion for Senator Singleton as Minority Leader of the Senate.
And that's why I'm asking is, is the motion for specific individuals or for classifications? I'm just trying to get exactly. who
No,
we're
I
gonna get.
said, or their designee, if they do not wish to serve, but it would have to be another member on the Legislative Council. They couldn't designate somebody in the House or the Senate who's not already on the Legislative Council.
So their designee would have to be a designee or member of the Legislative Council that included the diversity side and/or the body side.
Yes.
Does she understand why I'm trying to get the clarification?
Correct. Excuse me?
If my math is correct, that means the Democrats will have 50% of the membership of this committee.
And so will the Republicans.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay, I just want to make, it's 50% Democrat, 50% Republican.
Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized?
Yes, Senator.
I don't know what go on in chambers. You know, I want to say that quickly. But I mean, everything shouldn't have to be referenced to Democrat and Republicans. I mean, we don't do that in the Senate. And I think not to the degree that I don't recognize that taking place to that degree. That when we have conversations about even whether it's diversity or anything else, that it's broken down to Democrats and Republicans. And I would hope we can get past that. It looked like we're trying to drive a train to serious about partisans, and I don't think that that's productive at all. And I just said that it's just like words. Words have meanings, and that's where I'm coming from. And they do. They have connotations and meanings, and I think we need to be mindful of that as we try to work together to get through the process that we're down here for. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, so the amendment, I guess, if you will, if you want to restate your amendment.
I moved to add 2 members to the negotiations committee, and those 2 persons would be the minority leader from the House, the minority leader from the Senate, or their designee of another minority member from the Legislative Council if they do not wish to serve.
Okay, so
Mr. Chairman,
yes, Mr. Pro Tem.
Senator, I've got a request of you related to your motion. The fact that we know the chair and the vice chair and who they are. The idea that we know the 2 leaders and who they are. The fact that we would be giving them an opportunity for a designee, but the chair and the vice chair do not have an opportunity for a designee.
Well, can I ask them now if they wish to serve or they would prefer?
If they wish to serve, I want to leave this meeting knowing exactly
Who it is.
who it is. I don't think it's fair to any of us
I agree.
to have it open-ended.
Senator Singleton, would you like to serve on the negotiations committee? Representative Daniels, would you like to serve on the negotiations committee? Okay. Then that's it. I make the motion to add 2 members to the negotiations committee, along with the chair and the vice chair of the Legislative Council, and those 2 members would be Minority Leader Daniels of the House and Minority Leader Singleton of the Senate.
Ms.
Mary Moore seconded.
Chairman, I've got 2 thoughts. It was brought up by someone about the balance between the body, the R's and the D's. One thought is we add the 2 general fund chairs to that committee. The other is we pare that back and go back to the original motion, and we establish via a resolution in this special session some kind of advisory committee that's comprised of people that want to be on the advisory committee for this project, not just the lease negotiations, but also the, how big the offices are, where they are. I mean, all those little details to feed into what the people who are in charge have. So, I mean, that may be a mess in and of itself. But back to the general fund chairs, I think that's a thought that we could entertain and should entertain to add to the negotiation committee.
Mr. Chairman. None of you were making the motion to approve what was brought before us.
Yeah,
with just
and I'm
the
fine
vice
with that
chair and
motion.
the chair
I'm fine with
and
that
Mr. Latham, and now you want to make it bigger. What is the problem with you all sharing some of this? When the Democrats were in control, many of you had vice chairs of committees. You don't share anything.
Don't recall that.
With us.
Don't recall that during my
Well-
4-year overlap term. And
Well,
now we're calling about
let
you
me
all.
finish, Senator
I mean,
Orr.
let's-
You brought up the thing about the Dems and the R's
no,
and the D's.
that was brought up earlier this morning, Senator.
Let me finish, Senator Orr. I don't see why you guys have a problem with sharing this negotiations committee. It's not like some major vote is going to happen. Not only that, if it was a tie where they wanted to do something and the R's wanted to do something else, you have Mr. Latham here as a tiebreaker. So I don't see that even happening. But I don't know why it can't be shared. And you always have a problem with doing that.
I would say, I think-
I look for the day when we can elect people who are going to work together on the merits of the issues.
Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
I think Senator Orr had a response.
That's fine.
No, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and bicker with the senator at 9:15 in the morning, but I'm happy with the motion as was originally proposed. It's been amended and seconded, or moved and seconded. We can have the vote. I was just trying to add a little bit of balance per the people of Alabama and how they have balanced the legislature per their will at the polls.
I'd like to
So not
recognize-
balanced.
I'd like to recognize Senator Smitherman, and I'd like to go ahead and take a roll call vote. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to start out at some point, but listen at the conversation, just for record, just for history's sake. When she was talking about the chairmen and whatnot, we had Senator Hamp Myers, who was a Republican, who was chairman of the most powerful committee that was in the legislature. And at that time, that was the one that brought all these car dealerships and everybody else to the state in the beginning. He was Republican, and it was about 30 of us. So it has been shared. I just want to say that with the most powerful position that we had, I was blessed to be a member of it. But I can just tell you, he was a solid Republican out of Coburn. But I do want to say this, is that I think it's unparalleled that how I feel about diversity in the Senate, and I want to thank my Senate colleagues for supporting that. I think Senator Figurs is right about we do need to add some diversity to that committee, period, and those two people are serving in that capacity. But I do agree with Senator Orr. We need to have an advisory committee, and we need to have a committee so more of us can be involved on this involvement with this. I will say this about history, and it speaks for itself. When we were the majority, that was one of the main problems, what you just said. It wasn't enough people had an opportunity, even on this committee, to give input as to the way they thought they wanted to see their state house to look and address those. So I support what she's trying to do, and that is get some diversity on it, but I support what he's trying to do in the advisory committee. And at the proper time, I'll be glad to be a co-sponsor.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my thing is, after listening to the conversation, is the committee that's going to meet with RSA, all you're going to do is bring a recommendation back to this committee, right? So, I mean, it's not like you're making decisions. This is a diverse committee here, without question. So all you're doing is getting the statistics and numbers and see what we're going to look at for us to take a final vote. So either approve it or disapprove it. And I suspect that there'll be more than one option with that. That would be my recommendation. And I certainly don't have a problem with what the senator's saying, but I think at the end of the day, instead of having multiple committees, this is the committee. I mean, we are going to make the decision. So that's my thing. I think we need to stay on track of where we're at.
Senator Speaker. Yeah, kind of piggyback on the speaker there. My question was of the process. So the process, this committee is not negotiating a final deal, or what are they doing? I mean, we're coming back for approval here, right? For example, I would have a lot of questions about some of the terms and things I'm reading here. This committee will vet, make recommendations, but the ultimate decision would come back to this group. Is that right?
Well, now, I just looked at this, and I didn't draft this, but the way it was proposed was to negotiate and execute a lease, but,
Yeah, that's the way I read it, Mr. Chairman. Let me, if we're going to
Absolutely.
go with a 5-person committee and per the substitute motion, I'd like to clarify and say at least 3 of the 5 have to sign the lease, or 3 legislators on the committee have to sign the lease or approve the lease. If we're going to continue with this negotiating committee being able to engage in that lease signature and execution. Does that make sense?
it does. I might propose that we make a subsequent amendment. I don't want to get too convoluted in
I didn't
this.
put anything on there. I just threw it out. We're in discussion phase.
It'd be ratified by the entire body.
Yeah, that's good.
Absolutely.
That takes some pressure off me, honestly.
Right.
Off Pro Tem.
I agree.
So, Othni's used to all the pressure, but, I think it's, time now, we've talked about it, about adding the minority leaders, and I am comfortable with that. I mean, this is the people's house. I know that Republicans have a majority, but this is for negotiating. This is for interplay. I think it brings several different talents together. I mean, I'm a dirt lawyer. He's a contractor. We've got some businessmen here that we're going to look at it from different perspective, and with iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. So I think that, and that counts for women too, Senator Figures. But
No, well, I'd noticed I gave that up from pushing that, but I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, and that's all I was trying to do. It's so good to have different perspectives involved.
Representative,
I just want to know, are we still on that motion?
we're about to take a vote.
Well, so to amend the original motion, it was amended by Senator Figures, and then to require that the recommendation of this 5-person committee come back to the Legislative Council for a final vote.
I was going to do that by separate amendment.
Okay.
We're getting kind of convoluted here. So at this point in time, why don't we take a voice vote on Senator Figure's motion? So all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? So the amendment carries. So I would offer a second amendment to further amend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the council.
Further amend the document to rather than to delete the word and execute the words and execute, and add to be ratified or rejected by the full Legislative Council. Is there a second for that? Okay, second by Representative Faulkner. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Whoa. Let me get this straight, Senator. You said by the full. Are we going by the full or by the majority of the council?
Well, certainly by a majority. It doesn't have to be unanimous.
Okay, you said full. I was just clarifying that before we go
Okay.
into the motion. You say majority then,
All
right?
right, let's clarify that. So my intention was it would be brought to this body and voted on by this body, and that would require a simple majority vote.
Well, in clarification, Mr. Chair, any action taken by this body that's a joint action requires 6 members of the House and 6 members of the Senate, not a simple majority. That's by law. So the vote would require a majority of the House members of the council and a majority of the Senate members of the council. Correct, from each side. And I would also caution y'all that I think we need to be prepared on this path to have that meeting fairly soon. Dr. Bronner's very anxious to try to get to terms on a lease. I have an expectation that we're going to work on those details immediately following this meeting, and hopefully within a very short order of a couple of weeks, we'd be in a position to put a lease back before this body.
Is that, everybody comfortable with that? All right, well, thank you. All right, so that takes care of their, how we're going to proceed with the possibility of a new State House. The next thing we have is a policy, and I intended to get in touch with more of you than I have, and I apologize for that. But we had some experiences this last session that made, made it to me and were problematic about how LSA staff is being utilized. I mean, they're basically the law firm for the legislature. And there are issues in the general authorization policies that this body's had. There have been issues about people operating under authorizations and having no idea what was going on, not receiving the Blue Jackets, not being in control of the amendments and so forth that they were bills they were sponsoring. So I'm going to let the secretary elaborate a little bit on what the proposal here is.
In working with the chair, the proposal, and y'all have it in tab C of your notebooks, would be that going forward, and the effective date is blank, there's no reason why that wouldn't be today's vote, but we can talk about that if we need to, that third parties would have to operate under a specific authorization. In other words, rather than blanket authorizations going forward, a member would have to authorize a specific project in order for a lobbyist to interact with LSA or work on a bill draft. That all communications, including draft legislation, will be shared with the authorizing legislator contemporaneously with the authorized third party, so that the member would be copied on all communications. That final legislative instruments, including backed legislation, would only be distributed to the authorizing legislator or his or her staff. For local bills, and local constitutional amendments, the third party can only obtain authorization for drafting from a legislator representing part of the county that is covered by that local legislation. That budget documents, amendments, and fiscal notes will not be drafted for third parties. That's current practice already and would continue. And that in all other respects, authorized third parties would continue to be handled in the same manner as requests from legislators, constitutional officers, and state agencies. And I probably should have prefaced all of this by saying statutorily, LSA provides drafting services, obviously to the 140 members of the legislature, but also to the governor and the constitutional officers and the cabinet agencies. And that's statutory and would continue without interruption under this policy.
So because we're in special session, and because theoretically, although I think any bills that weren't dropped yesterday aren't going to get considered, but I would move that we adopt this with a start date of September 1st. Okay, is there any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that is the last item on the agenda, so thank you for your attendance.
Thank you.